It's one thing to say that you should stay strong, look forward, and not lose yourself in sorrow when confronted with the death of a loved one. It's an entirely different beast to actually practice when the time comes. It's even harder when the person that died was a major motivator for you to do your best each day. Be real with me for a second. If the person closest to you died, how long do you think it'd take for you to recover emotionally? Weeks? Months? Years? Ever? This is the critical question posed by the epilogue story to Persona 3, episode Aigis, also known as The Answer. Persona 3 is famous for its narrative discussing life and death, but in all honesty, the main story doesn't place a heavy emphasis on what will always accompany death: grief. Characters certainly grieve during the game, but it's kind of downplayed in favor of portraying death in a much more positive light. The game makes an effort to be like, don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. It's a nice message that I'm sure we'd all like to do ourselves, but as I already implied, it's never that simple. Today, we're going to be taking a closer look at episode Aigis and analyzing its story with a full literary analysis. What are the story's themes and messages, and what tools does it use to convey them? While there admittedly isn't a whole lot of story content to analyze, I think you'll be surprised with how much thematic complexity they squeezed into the cracks between Abyss of Time floors. Before we begin, a couple of quick things. First, this video is a follow-up to my literary analysis of Persona 3. I recommend watching that video first, since I'll be referencing it here and there. Second, here is your one and only spoiler warning. We will be spoiling the entirety of Persona 3, episode Aigis, from the bosses we fight to the ending of the story. We'll also naturally be spoiling the Persona 3 main story since this is a direct sequel. Finally, I'm sure this is obvious, but just to make absolutely clear, episode Aigis is the version of the game that will be the basis for our analysis, so parts of our insight might come from details on characterization or presentation only in this version. I'm aware a couple bits of characterization were changed from the original The Answer release, but we're going to be concentrating on episode Aigis instead for the simple reason of consistency, since I already used reload for the first part. By the way, pay no mind to the trophy pop-ups and some of the important cutscenes. I kinda forgot that would be a thing for the account I used to capture footage. Alright, we're now ready to begin. Welcome to Persona 3, episode Aigis. What better place to start a full-length epilogue analysis than the epilogue's beginning? Especially for episode Aigis, since its story opens up with probably the most surprising possible direction they could have taken. We're shown a premonition of Aigis and a character we haven't met yet, fighting against Ken and Akihiko. It'd be one thing for the group to be taking up arms again against a new threat that emerged after Nyx, but here they are fighting amongst themselves. There's not a whole lot we can really say about it yet since we have no context, but I think that's kind of the point. I'm not sure exactly how common it is, but every now and then, a story will present a scene from much later in the narrative at its beginning to create a sense of intrigue. Fire Emblem does this all the time, for example. These typically are terrifying or shocking somehow out of context, so we'll be on the edge of our seats as the story naturally heads toward what we've already seen beyond the fourth wall. However, this is usually a trick to help invest a player in the story that has no reason to be invested yet. Episode Aigis is different because I think we can safely assume that 99.9% of people playing it will have already played Persona 3. This was originally a free epilogue side game bundled with an enhanced re-release of Persona 3. You physically cannot play episode Aigis without a copy of Persona 3 Reload. We, the player, are already invested in these characters. We know who they are, so we also know that they would never seriously try to hurt each other. They already went through their whole infighting arc. There must be some sort of logical explanation, right? If that's true, why go for this kind of setup? And, well, I think the answer is exactly what I just said. I'll posit that this opening fight cinematic is in the game to make us believe that there will be a logical explanation that sorts itself out later. I don't think the intention is for us to be dropping our jaws to the floor that they're fighting. We can't really elaborate on why the game would want us to trust in the logic to follow until we actually get to the fight in the story, so just keep it in the back of your mind for now. After the cinematic, we're greeted to yet another surprising direction for the story. Seize, for the most part, is not handling Makoto's death very well. I don't mean surprising in the sense of why would the group still be sad or something like that, though. It's completely understandable from their perspective since episode Aigis takes place on March 31st, and Makoto died only a little over 3 weeks ago. He was near and dear to all their hearts, so it'd be more surprising if they had collectively gotten over it by now. The surprising part is how Seize is portrayed relative to the tone of Persona 3's ending. Makoto's death is written to be a heroic send-off with a positive framing. It's bittersweet, but it's preceded by a heartfelt speech from Aigis discussing the meaning of life and how it's okay for Makoto to rest now and all that. Additionally, the colors of the school rooftop are soft and soothing. A clear blue sky, light gray roof tiles, bright pink cherry blossom petals fluttering in the wind. Visually, the atmosphere for his final moments is serene. Even more, the ending song, Memories of You, is incredibly emotionally charged, and I'm sure many tears were shed as the credits rolled, mine included, but it's a pretty energetic song. It's like a heartfelt love letter to Makoto's life rather than a grave mourning of his death. They could have easily written Makoto's death to occur on a dark, gloomy, rainy day, with Aigis begging Makoto to hang on, and have a much slower, somber song as the game fades to black instead of white. They obviously didn't portray his death like that though, likely because Persona 3 is more about learning how to live than remaining depressed over death. In episode Aigis, we see Fuka uneasy, Aigis dropping out of school, and Yukari not even wanting to be around. Anytime the conversation gets lighthearted for a bit, it quickly shifts to sadness from reminiscing on their past and lamenting how Makoto can't join them. For us to see the main cast in this state right after an ending like that is a bit of emotional whiplash. So, why? What's the reason to seemingly go against the positive tone? I would argue the answer is because there's kind of a small fundamental flaw in Persona 3's themes and messages, and the characters of Persona 3 that went through the development learning all the important morals of its own story are running straight into it. With a laser focus on moving on from death, staying positive, and appreciating life, we run out of time to grieve. Don't get me wrong, I'm not suddenly going back and saying Persona 3 was actually a thematic failure, I'm just saying it was originally missing a little piece of the puzzle. The main purpose of episode Aigis existing is to complete the messages. More on that later. The premise of episode Aigis' conflict is that when Seize was just about ready to turn in their evokers and move out of their dorm, they got stuck in a time loop. March 31st repeats over and over, and they can't even leave their dorm. All they can do is enter the abyss of time, which conveniently spawns in their basement. A new robot claiming to be Aigis' sister, Metis, also shows up, and while they initially try to kill each other, they end up on the same team, so all is well. Anyway, since we're all amazingly adept at analyzing stories here, a time loop setting should immediately make us think of themes such as being stuck in the past, unable to move on, or fearful of the future. Maybe a combination of all of those. Time literally not progressing is the perfect setting to discuss characters who figuratively cannot progress in their personal lives. For instance, our star of the show, Aigis. In the main Persona 3 video, I argued that Aigis was a surrogate for the player in the story. She represents the target audience of someone with an unhealthy relationship with death and lacking a reason to live that ultimately overcomes both of these issues. The main story alone has plenty of evidence for that reading, so it's very fitting that Aigis is who we focus on in the sequel. Unfortunately, Aigis probably was hurt the hardest by Makoto's death. He was her reason to live, so she fell into a deep depression. She thought she had everything figured out, what the meaning of life was, what the meaning of her life was. When that meaning was taken away from her, there's nothing that can fill that void. All she wants is Makoto back, and I think thematically, that's why Aigis starts acting like Makoto. She's overwhelmed with grief and confusion from losing her reason, so she fills her entire personality with what her reason used to be. She doesn't know how else to express it because she's never truly grieved before. She's fixated on what she can no longer have. Somehow, she inherited Makoto's wildcard and can now summon multiple personas, beginning with Orpheus, Makoto's first persona. I don't really understand how she inherited the wildcard in-universe, but it makes total sense thematically. It's not even just the persona stuff that makes her more similar to Makoto, though. Aigis is noticeably less expressive throughout the episode, just like him. If Aigis really were a surrogate for the player, and we already played as Makoto in the main story, then taking control of a sort of Makoto-Aigis hybrid in the epilogue should be natural, but to me at least, it feels incredibly uncanny. I can't be alone on this. It just looks and feels viscerally wrong for Aigis to perform all the actions Makoto once did. Sitting in Makoto's velvet room, summoning Orpheus, giving an unvoiced answer from a list of dialogue options followed by that trademark silent protagonist nod to indicate conversation without actually having to voice all the possibilities. Aigis was a fully fleshed out character in Persona 3 with a clear personality, desires, struggles, motivations, and relationships with others. She's still kind and helpful and pleasant, but she doesn't feel like herself anymore. Now she just acts like a hollow copy of Makoto. Aigis seemingly has lost nearly all of her development from Persona 3. Her enlightenment in the main story was symbolized by her becoming truly human, but her human qualities have disappeared. She no longer dreams or requires sleep in general. Her capability for emotions is much lower than before. Even the pain from losing Makoto faded. She narrates how in the midst of her depression, it all just suddenly stopped. I mean, on the one hand, it's good that she's not wallowing in despair constantly, but this situation is arguably worse. She's become numb to everything, just like a true robot would be. Interestingly though, Aigis lost many of her robotic qualities too. She can't understand Koromaru anymore. She also can no longer activate Orgia mode. Fuka confirms that Aigis' body parts are all functional, so it's not a hardware issue. Aigis seemingly forgot how to activate it in the first place. Speaking of which, she can't even summon her persona, Athena. She gained the ability to summon just about every other persona, but not her other half specifically. I'd like to draw your attention to the opening song of episode Aigis, Disconnected. This song is sung from Aigis' perspective, and it's about her grief after Makoto's death. There's a specific line I want to highlight that encapsulates this weird not human, not robot state Aigis is in. "Oh, I don't know what I am, but I miss myself, 'cause she's not here anymore." It means exactly what it sounds like it means. Whoever Aigis was before Makoto's death doesn't exist anymore, and she doesn't know who or what she is instead. It makes sense for her human qualities to vanish as her reason for living was taken away from her, but her robot qualities are also removed to emphasize how this behavioral change isn't a simple regression. This current Aigis truly is not the Aigis we once knew. The parts of her that we all know and love are gone. If she went back to her trademark robot catchphrases like "as they say" or "I comprehend," then her base programmed level of personality would still be there, but it isn't. There's just nothing, and if there's nothing, there's no way Aigis can continue progressing as a person, hence wanting to return to the lab. Aigis is reduced to no personality as a representation of what unchecked grief does, and how going through a massive character arc doesn't make you immune to its effects. Grief can take many forms, and I'm sure you've heard about the 5 stages of grief before. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But I don't think those stages actually tell the full story. We could reach the acceptance stage by acknowledging the deceased is never coming back and proving we can still function at an okay level, but that doesn't stop us from just kind of giving up afterward. Aigis isn't sad anymore. She's not angry, she's not denying anything, she's not trying to bargain. She accepts the reality of the situation. She's just done with her life. She wished to become a simple machine again, and her wish was granted. She no longer has ambitions in life. She no longer wants to do anything. She just gave up, and it's because she hasn't actually grieved properly. What should we do to avoid this, then? Well, sorry, but we don't have the information needed to answer that yet. Let's check in on the rest of the group for now to see how they're coping. The rest of C's don't have it as bad as Aigis, but they all think similarly deep down. All of them want Makoto back more than anything. All they've been doing is talking about their past adventures and how much they miss him. And as we'll find out later, that combined mindset is what traps them in the time loop and keeps them attached to their dorm. They cannot move on. It's also why, in the abyss of time, they all chase after a phantom shadow that looks exactly like Makoto and see memories of their past along the way. It symbolizes how they long for the good old times. They all desperately want to see Makoto return, but that shadow isn't Makoto. It's a manifestation of their desire for the past, hence the shadow using their personas, their other selves, in battle. The memories they see are specifically the moments before they awaken to their personas, and I'd argue that's because all of them have their thoughts occupied by their time in Seas. Their reasons for awakening are also what gave them reason to fight in Seas, so if they want to continue fighting in Seas, it makes sense for them all to see visions of what started the feeling for them. By the way, you may have noticed we just skipped roughly 10 hours, give or take, of the story right there. Those revelations about the Abyss of Time and the Makoto-looking shadow happen after the 7th and final door. We were able to kind of fast-track through much of the plot, since the main meat of the game is just going through repetitive Abyss of Time dungeon crawling. It's mechanically identical to Tartarus, and there's no social sim stuff to break up the gameplay, so it definitely gets pretty stale pretty quickly. Like, we've done all this already, for 264 floors, and now we're being asked to do 148 more of them. There's not even a super engaging hook for us to want to learn more. It's basically just chasing after the shadowy figure that clearly looks like Makoto, but the characters dance around pointing out what's obvious to us for hours and hours of gameplay. If there is one common criticism for episode Aigis' story, it's on this beginning section of the game after all the initial hooks and intrigue are done being built up. Not much happens plot-wise for a long time. You could sum up the major events that progress the story in like 2 sentences for the first 6 doors of the game. Hey, haven't we said all this before? Well, I think there might be a point to structuring the story in this repetitive way. That desire to just get it all over with, that we've been through it all already. That's exactly what Yukari is thinking. Our viewpoint as a player is represented by Yukari this time, since Aigis has other issues going on. And even more interestingly, Yukari is kind of the ultimate antagonist of the game. Only kinda though. She didn't turn evil or anything, but she is the one that stands against Aigis at the end and causes the whole group conflict, so by definition she is one. She represents a negative mindset that we could unfortunately acquire during grieving if we don't also take in the lessons from episode Aigis. Yukari is on edge for the entire story. She initially didn't even want to come back to the dorm to say goodbye, and now she's stuck in a time loop of painful memories. She's taking Makoto's death hard, and she's expressing her grief through anger and frustration. It's nothing super terrible in episode Aigis, but you can tell she'd rather be doing literally anything else. My guess is just being around the dorm is painful for her, and she's lashing out as a result. Precisely because of how painful it all is, Yukari wants to move on as quickly as possible. She fundamentally understands the right thing to do is accept Makoto's death, learn to live with it, and move on, so she tries to force it even though she isn't actually ready yet. So when the chance to potentially go back to the past for real and change things arises, Yukari wants to seize the opportunity. Everyone in the group reacts negatively, and I suspect we as a player are meant to as well. Who's ever heard of a story about the careful balance of life and death where the ultimate goal is to literally go back in time to undo what can never be undone in real life? Akihiko speaks bluntly against the suggestion, which causes Yukari to panic and double down since she's emotionally unstable from grief, and then everything kind of explodes. There are lots of things going on here, but first I want to acknowledge why Yukari specifically is chosen to represent this stance. Out of all the Seas members, she's actually one of the least experienced with grief. Junpei had Chidori, Akihiko had Miki and Shinji, Ken had his mother, Mitsuru had her father, Koromaru had his owner. While Yukari's father passed away too, that was when she was around 6 years old. She was way too young to go through an actual complex grieving process, so I don't count it. And then there's Fuka, who doesn't have a whole lot of relevance, despite never actually going through a heavy grieving process that we know of. I guess Shinji kind of counts, but only Akihiko, Mitsuru, and Ken had some sort of deep connection to him. It's sad for the rest still, but they only knew him for about a month. This is a legitimate criticism I have of episode Aigis. I don't think Fuka is the type of girl to lash out like Yukari, but I would expect some sort of bigger reaction from her. I can't think of a logical reason why she seems to have things mostly all under control. Unfortunately, I suspect this was a narrative sacrifice for gameplay purposes. It's complicated to make the navigator have complex issues when you need them for a core gameplay mechanic. It's not a huge deal, but it stands out because it's easy to see why Yukari and Aigis are struggling more than the rest, but Fuka isn't despite fitting the pattern. Alright, with that out of the way, we can finally talk about the Colosseum fights. This is the full context for the premonition of Aigis and Metis fighting Akihiko and Ken. SEES needs to combine their 8 separate keys into one in order to escape the time loop, but nobody is willing to budge on what they want to use the ultimate key for, staying in the present or returning to the past, so they decide to fight for it. Remember how I said I thought the point of showing the fight scene early was to convince us that there would be a logical explanation for it? Well, as it turns out, there isn't one. It's an entirely emotional explanation. Akihiko and Ken team up because they both strongly agree to leave the past in the past. They are firmly on team present because their entire personalities were shaped by their past trauma, and they also want to respect Makoto's sacrifice. Junpei and Koromaru team up because they're the leftovers, but they're also the most well-adjusted duo in regards to grief. I can't really speak for Koromaru, but Junpei indicates how he doesn't like the framing of past versus present, and we'll soon learn he's actually correct. Yukari is on team past because she hasn't given herself a chance to heal and is latching onto trying to pull off a miracle. It's not explicitly stated, but I think you can tell that Mitsuru stands with Yukari not because she believes going back to the past is correct too, but rather she doesn't want Yukari to stand alone. None of this is rooted in any sort of logic. They're not even being forced to fight to accomplish anything. The reason these conflicts are happening is just because the group doesn't understand how to sort out all their emotions from grief. We're shown the Colosseum early on to plant the idea that there will be an important reason for the fight just so the game can completely tear that notion down. Grief often blinds us. It causes our emotions to run wild, and it creates conflict among the people we hold dear, even if they're also grieving alongside us. That illustrates exactly why we need to have a targeted approach for handling grief so it doesn't grow wildly out of hand. That right there is our big takeaway. Grieving is an active process, not a passive one. It's also not optional. Aigis passively let the stages of grief pass her by, and she ended up casting away everything that made her, her in the form of Metis. Yukari tried to skip the grieving process entirely, but all that accomplished was delaying her inevitable crash. After Aigis and Metis win all the keys, Yukari has a complete breakdown as all her bottled emotions finally come barreling out. Side note, I love Mitsuru and Yukari's relationship. It's so sweet seeing Mitsuru comfort Yukari like this after all the drama they went through together in the main story. With all their emotions battled out, the group comes to a consensus of what to do with the key. Neither try to change the past, nor go straight back to the present. They need closure. They need to know how and why Makoto died. They choose to go to the moment of Makoto's death. Symbolically, I would argue this represents the group finally partaking in the active process of grief. They're going straight to the source of it all, and they're going to learn all they can about it so they can discuss. This is the type of reflection that needs to happen during grieving. We can't just hope it gets better on its own or skip it entirely. I would like to make something clear before we proceed to the final boss and the events that transpire. True closure is kind of like the white whale of the grieving process. It's rare we'll ever be able to learn something that wraps up all our grief in a nice little bow and allows us to move on. When I said SEES needs closure, what I really meant was they need to put a figurative bandage on themselves to close their currently open grief-inflicted wound. The pain from losing Makoto will never go away. The injury will leave a scar and there's nothing they can really do about that, but they need to stop the bleeding first. A major component of why Makoto's death was so hard for SEES was how it came out of nowhere for them. Had they known Makoto was destined to die after sealing Nyx away and he only managed to hang on out of sheer determination to keep their promise before he actually died, I'm sure they would have been able to handle it better. They would have been able to come to terms with Makoto's death and understand his sacrifice while he was still alive. They would have known there was nothing they could have done. In the present, without that knowledge of his cause of death, There's that fleeting idea in the back of their minds thinking that maybe his death was preventable. Maybe they personally could have done something differently. I'm sure part of why it's so difficult for them to move on is that missing piece keeping their wound open. If we leave it uncovered and just wait for time to heal it like Aigis and Yukari did, then it might get infected. When grieving, we need to ensure lingering doubts of ours are addressed somehow before we can truly move on. That is the type of closure Seize needs and what we need to seek in real life when it happens to us. When Seize travels to the moment of Makoto's death, they learn something rather surprising. Nyx, the ultimate incarnation of death that was going to usher in the extinction of all life just a few months ago, was not actively malicious. To be honest, they probably could have figured that out already based on Ryoji, but it's nice to see it clearly stated. That means Makoto didn't actually seal Nyx to protect the world from her. What he actually did was create a barrier between Nyx and humanity so that humanity's calls would no longer reach her. Nyx can only descend when she is summoned by humanity's desires for death, so in reality, Makoto became the Great Seal to protect humanity from themselves. In the main Persona 3 video, I argued how Makoto was meant to act as a teacher for us to learn how to live our life and how to find meaning in our life. If we don't find a reason to live, then we'll likely latch onto death to deliver us to a quote-unquote better place. Unfortunately for humanity, the vast majority of them never met Makoto. The wisdom of both knowing that you need a personal reason to live and how to find one isn't easily come by. Humanity is filled with people that don't make the most of their lives still. Junpei even comments on how many people went straight back to not caring about things even after Strega's cult disbanded. So, the manifestation of humanity's desire for death, Erebus will continuously reform and try to break Makoto's seal to reach Nyx. Thematically, we can read this imagery as how Makoto won't ever give up on helping others learn how to live, and neither should we. His example will always exist even in his death. He so strongly believed that life was worth living that he sacrificed his own to let others experience the joy. We can't let that go to waste. After defeating an incarnation of Erebus, Seize is finally able to receive closure on Makoto's death. They can all finally start healing for real, and they agree to go back to the present. There is still one unresolved plot thread though. Aigis still lost her reason to live and hasn't found a new one yet. If she doesn't, then she may as well just be dead. We see at the beginning how when Aigis is now lost on the answer to her life, she's unbothered by the possibility of turning to death as the answer. Persona 3 states many times over that the generic meaning of life is to form bonds with others. I haven't commented on this much because the game just straight up says it, so there's no analysis to be had there. I interpret this as being different from an individual's personal reason to live, though. It just so happened to also be Makoto's personal reason to live, and Aigis' experiences throughout the episode helps her realize something shockingly simple. This is a pretty good reason. Her original reason was to be close with Makoto specifically, but why can't she live to be close to all her friends? After that clicks, Aigis' journey of the Fool comes to an end. She recombines with Metis and transforms back to being human, but this time it's for good. She was only temporarily enlightened before, but now that she's gone through immense grief and self-reflection, there is truly nothing more for her to learn. Her robotic circuits burn out because they're no longer needed. She's just a human now, and she's ready to live her new life. She decides to enroll in school again, symbolizing her desire to live. Seize also makes a point of deciding to keep their evokers around. They shouldn't be needed anymore, but it couldn't hurt to hold on to them. The evokers being turned in at the start of the game were a representation of how Seize was aggressively trying to move on without addressing the underlying issues. Now that it's all settled though, they're able to healthily keep their evokers with them as a symbol of all they went through together. The doors close on Iwatodai Dorm, finally ending this chapter in their lives for real. And while they unfortunately can't take Makoto with them, they'll keep his memory alive as they all continue living, just like he would have wanted. Alright, it's time to wrap things up. What have we learned today? Grief is complicated. It's ugly, it's nasty, it's scary. But it's something that has to be addressed. The alternative is much, much worse. I can't exactly tell you a formula that will help you navigate each and every period of grieving in your life since everyone handles things differently, but episode Aigis does teach us one crucial lesson. You need to come to terms with what's still occupying your mind in grief. Do what you can to address those. Don't leave the wound untreated. It will scar, but that's better than dying. Live while you can. You only get one chance. We have now finally reached the end. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please do make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe so I can make more videos like these. They take a lot of effort to make, especially for Persona, so if you really want to help them survive on YouTube, you can also consider becoming a channel member. By the way, if the subject matter of this video spoke deeply to you, I highly recommend both playing Expedition 33 and watching my video on it once you do. Before we truly end, there are a couple of things I wanted to mention that didn't quite fit anywhere in the script. First, I have to get this off my chest. I hadn't actually played through the answer or episode Aigis before making this video, although I did know basically the entire story except for one critical detail. I had no idea about the Colosseum fights, and I got punished for it. I didn't have Metis on my main team, so she was severely underleveled. I also may have gotten a tad tired of the Abyss of Time, so I sped through the last door, leading to Aigis being slightly underleveled. And I got soft-locked by Akihiko and Ken. I just got straight up stat checked and the game wouldn't let me go back and grind. I decided to just swallow my pride and lower the difficulty to get through it, but wow, that was frustrating. I wish they had tied Metis' level to Aigis's to prevent this from happening, since that makes some degree of sense lore-wise. Second, this one is more for Persona 3 as a whole, but I wanted to include my personal tier list of all the major Persona 3 characters. I had to wait for this follow-up video so I could include Metis. My ranking criteria was the following. How much do I like them? So, yeah, here you go. Yukari is the objectively best Persona 3 character. Akinari definitely has the better social link, but there's just so much more Yukari in the main story that allows her to overtake him. Alright, that's it for real. Thank you once again for watching, and see you next time.